Hi, everyone. This is Don Leland with Edge Management Consulting in Seattle, Washington, and you're listening to the world's #1 pest control training podcast, the Pest Geek Podcast with Frank Hernandez.
This edition of the Pest Geek Podcast is brought to you by Pest Routes. Pest Routes, supercharge your company with Pest Routes, the #1 pest control software to help you dominate your goals. Visit them at pestroutes.com and get your free demo.
Pull out your hose and grab your can. We're about to integrate another Pest Geek podcast. Hi, everybody. Frank Hernandez here, and welcome to the Pest Geek podcast, bringing you the latest information on pests, products, and politics from today's leading industry sources to help you start, manage, and grow your pest control business.
Hey, welcome back. Welcome back to another edition of the Pest Geek podcast. I am Frank Hernandez, your Pest Geek, here discussing all things pest. We want to remind our audience to join in on the revolution. That's right, join in on the conversation, be part of the society. Pest Geek Podcast Listeners Group on Facebook. And we're on YouTube, we're on the web, pestgeekpodcast.com. Check out there the notes, everything that we put into the podcast. They're all on there. And here is Steven Van Tassel with today's topic.
Thanks, Frank. Hi, everyone in the Pest Geek world. My name is Steven Van Tassel. I'm with Wildlife Control Consulting, and I'm here to talk today about house mice. A lot of you are probably dealing with house mice, but maybe you're having situations where you're just not getting the level of control that you want, and my suspicion is that part of this is due to the fact that we don't have a full appreciation of all of the aspects and abilities capable of house mice. House mice are amazing creatures, and so what I've found when I give presentations is that a lot of people don't really know or don't really fully appreciate how much physical abilities mouse actually have. So I wanted to give you a little bit of data here. Maybe some of this will be a refresher for those of you, but if that's the case, it never hurts to get reacquainted with what this mouse can do, as well as for those of you who don't know, then this will be a good start for you to understand what the mice can do and often what it can't do. First, let's talk about its climbing abilities. They are exceptional climbers. Essentially, they can climb up any rough surface. So a lot of times in buildings that have brick exteriors, mice are just going to climb the brick, and then where the boards that usually at the top near the soffit area is overlaying the brick, you'll notice there are little gaps. Those gaps caused by the mortar joint that is used to put two bricks together, but there's usually a gap there because it's usually indented in, and the board doesn't fill that gap, so a mouse just has to climb the brick, squeeze right underneath that board, and voila. It's inside the attic and has its run of the home in that situation. It's a commonly overlooked way for mice to get in. I had a lady from Colorado once give me a ring and said she had a brand new house, and she said she had mice and called an exterminator. The exterminator came out and did exclusion along the foundation. And I said, well, didn't they tell you that mice climb? And her answer was, mice climb? And the answer was absolutely, because the exclusion around the foundation was definitely important, definitely helped her, but she still had mouse problems. Why? Because mice climb. Don't forget that. If you're going to do a true mouse exclusion, and yes, it is possible. It is possible. Let me repeat that. It is possible to do a full mouse exclusion on a structure. Didn't say it was easy. I'm just telling you it's possible. It can be done. You need to go from the peak of the roof all the way to the ground. So that's how you got to look at that. So mice can climb any rough surface. Second, we call it rope climbing, but they can climb a 10-gauge wire. So that's a wire, that's probably the thinnest wire they're going to be able to climb. How good are they at swimming? Well, unlike the Norway rat, the house mouse is a very poor swimmer. So you've probably heard many of the stories where people have created little ramps over buckets full of water, and they put some peanut butter on it, and when the mouse gets on it, the mouse falls off and falls into the water, and of course then he's swimming for a while and can't get back out, right, because he drowns. So they are very poor swimmers, where rats, on the other hand, are rather good swimmers for themselves. How small of an entry can a mouse get into? Well, the minimum width. And again, we're focusing here on the skull of this mouse. Some people may have the misguided notion that mice can readjust their bones or they're flexible and all that. No. If the hole is going to be determined by the size of the head. They're not going to be able to shrink their head. So the research shows down to about 1/4 of an inch, so 0.24 inches, which would be about 1/4 of an inch, is a great rule of thumb. If you're going to try to secure something out against house mice, 1/4 inch hardware cloth, 1/4 inch mesh is going to pretty much do the job. So down to 0.24, that's going to really do it. That's going to be a minimum. So that's a good rule of thumb for you to use. How far can they do a running jump? So if they're trying to jump across something, how far can they go? And the answer is about 24 inches. Think about that. For an animal that's only about 6 inches long, tip of the tail to the tip of the nose, that's an adult, is about 6 inches long, that they can jump literally 4 times their total length. And if you're just looking at body length, you're probably looking at something closer to 8 times their length. So it's an enormous ability. Think about the springboard action of that. So we need to appreciate that gaps that sometimes, like how are mice getting onto countertops and things of this nature? They are exceptional climbers and they're exceptional leapers. Now here's the other piece of evidence that I think a lot of people don't appreciate. And this was some research done out of Hawaii. The research was done by a gentleman called, let me get his name out here. His name is William C. Pitt, P-I-T-T, and him and his co-authors published an article that said physical and behavioral abilities of commensal rodents related to the design of selective rodenticide bait stations of the International Journal of Pest Management, volume 57.3, which is the third edition, 2011, pages 189 to 193. Let me kind of summarize some of his work there. What they did is they wanted to find out how high could a mouse jump in a vertical leap. Now understand what this is going to be describing. It's a leap from one horizontal surface straight up to a second horizontal surface. And what they did was they took a variety, like 20 different mice, different ages, some were young, some were older, and they basically took platforms and they taught the mice to keep jumping to these levels by using bait and getting them to make these leaps. These are not running jumps. We've already talked about that ability. These are vertical leaps. This is sort of the Michael Jordan just leaping up, dunking the basketball, right? So this is what these mice were doing. They were jumping from one surface to the next surface. Here's the information I want you to take home. The weakest mouse, the third person on the the third string of the basketball bench. These were not your best jumpers. These are not your best players. The weakest mouse jumped 9.8 inches. Think about that. Almost 10 vertical inches. Now, if the weakest mouse can jump almost 10 inches vertical, what do you think the Michael Jordan mouse could do? The mouse that has really exceptional jumping ability. I'm showing my age here. Michael Jordan was just an amazing basketball player, and he could do some jumps do some dunks from amazing distances. He had incredible physical ability, and so this is the kind of analogy I'm using. What do you think the best mouse can do? So if you're wondering why, you have mouse droppings sometimes on shelves and places, like, how did the mouse get up here? Well, I want you to be thinking about, can the mouse climb up there? Probably. But if not, there are going to be situations where the mouse just jumped. You just jumped up to that particular level, and it's an exceptional ability. So I want you to think about that. The rule of thumb is think about 10 inches that mouse can jump up. So understand the physical abilities of these mice, that you're going to have to keep this in mind when you're doing your inspections, when you're trying to understand mouse behavior. Don't ignore areas where you think, oh, that's too far. I don't need to go into there because the mouse probably couldn't reach it. Probably not. Probably the mouse could get into that area, and we need to have a better appreciation for what mice can do. So let me give another issue about mouse reproductive rate. And sometimes you'll see some statistics that go out there. Mice can, in several months, you get get hundreds of thousands of mice. I'm obviously being a little superfluous here and a little facetious, but you've seen some amazing numbers in terms of how mice are able to reproduce. Well, those are often governed by ideal circumstances where food and shelter are not an issue. Obviously, mice have high reproductive rates, but those reproductive rates are governed by the availability of food and the availability of space. And so this is something that we have to think about, and that is what happens is that sometimes when we come into a situation and try to control mice, we're feeling like rock stars, we're trapping mice or poisoning mice, and the customer's getting happy, and we think we're done, and we remove the materials that we use to control those mice, and then 3 months later we're getting a call saying they still have mice. What happened? Well, what likely happened is that you reduced the mouse population from a high level to a low level, but you didn't eliminate the mice. And so what happened was there was enough mice there available that in a few months they were able to exploit the food that was available, and were still able to have that female, that all-important female, was able to then reproduce and then create other young, and they had a little bit of an explosion. Why? Because she's got plenty of food available. A lot of times clients aren't going to be removing food sources available. There's going to be plenty of shelter because you've already freed up a lot of places for the mouse to be because you've killed their relatives or earlier members of that particular house. And so then they have that ability to have maximum families. But let me give you sort of some minimum numbers. I've used conservative numbers on this just so as we get a reflection about an understanding of just how well mice can reproduce. So let's consider 2 mice, a male and a female. So they mate. The female gives birth within 3 weeks, about 21 days. Okay, 3 weeks. We're going to say that she's had 5 young, which is on the lower end of their normal reproductive rate. And we're going to say 3 of those young are going to be males and 2 of those young are going to be females. All right, so now we have 3 weeks. We have our first batch of young. In 56 days, those young are going to be able to mate, and those 2 females are then going to be able to reproduce. Remember, you can trap 2 of the males and you're still good to go because there's going to be 2 males left, or even have 1 male, and 1 male can take care of all the females, no problem. Remember, when we're doing mouse control, it's all about the females. And I'll give you a little bit of another statistic here, information in a moment here. But stay with me. So we have 3 weeks for the first batch of young. It takes 56 days for those young to mature enough to be able to mate. So now we're up to about 77 days, a little over 2 months, 77 days. So we've got 2 months plus about 2 weeks, so we're now out about 8 weeks. Then they mate, and 21 days later, they could have young, and I'm using conservative numbers here, and we're now going to have a total of 10 young. So now, if you consider that the adults are still going to be alive, we're going to have a total of 7 plus 10. We're going to have a total of 17 mice within the space of about 4 months. We'll go from 2 mice to 17 mice in about 4 months. Think about that. You may say, well, that's not very fast. Yes, but then the next 4 months, those 17 are going to become, we're going to have a multiplier effect. Now, there's going to be probably some mortality in that. But again, you get this idea of a massive reproductive growth. Reproductive numbers occur when the mice have plenty of food and plenty of shelter. If they don't have that, then they're probably just going to go into replacement mode, or they have to disperse. So this is why I tell people, if you start seeing mice in the living space of an area, rather than just hearing them in the walls, to my mind, a good sign is when mice are spilling over into the living space of the house. that's a sign that they've run out of room in the walls and they're now getting even worse. So it's not always true. There are going to be exceptions to this, but that is something to keep in mind. If people are saying, yeah, we've seen mice in the living space, that's a bad sign. That's usually the infestation has been there for a while. So let's talk a little bit about some control when we're dealing with mice. I remember I talked about you can have one male take care of all those females, and that's certainly true, but there's something about males that you want to make sure you understand. Mice, when they reproduce, the females generally have 1-to-1 ratio. That is, they have, for every female they have as a child, they'll have a male. So they tend to be 1-to-1 in their proportions. When you're trapping, if you're not checking the gender of the mice that you're catching, make sure you're wearing your PPE, your gloves, right? Don't get down and dirty with your bare hands here. You want to make sure you're wearing your appropriate gloves. But when you're checking the genders of the animals that you're trapping, if you're catching too many males, you're not getting appropriate control. Sometimes what happens when your trap captures a dominant male, subordinate males are interested in those traps. They will then go and get caught in that trap because they're interested. The research seems to suggest that females tend to avoid scents when they smell the scent of a dominant male. They avoid those traps. So you may feel like a rock star. Oh, I'm catching all these mice. And you are. That's good. But are you catching the right proportion of male and female? If you're not, then you need to make an adjustment. And so what happens is sometimes people feel they got great success and they're not, and they are having success, but catching males, they're not removing the infestation. They're harvesting. They're not controlling. So what's the easiest solution for that? Add more traps. Add fresh, clean traps to catch your females. And so then make sure then your proportion. So if you're off by 10%, not a big deal. So if you're catching 10 males and then 11 females, or 11 males and 10 females, that's fine. There's going to be a little variation there. But if you're catching 15 males and only 8 females, you've got a problem. There's more to go. That's something to think about. Well, we have a lot more to talk about in terms of when it comes to commensal rodents, in this case, house mice, but I hope that will help you get these situations resolved about house mice helpful. My name is Stephen Van Tassel, and I'm with Wildlife Control Consultant. Back to you, Frank.
We hope you have enjoyed this edition of the Pest Geek Podcast. Until next time, have a pestacular day.
Thank you for listening to the Pest Geek Podcast. If you have enjoyed the Pest Geek Podcast, please give us a rating, write a review, or subscribe to the channel. You can join the Pest Geek Society by visiting pestgeekpodcast.com. Thank you for listening. See you next time.